The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as Staff Sergeant Emily Rodriguez pulled her duffel bag from the back of her truck. The North Carolina military base buzzed with activity, soldiers moving with purpose across the compound. Emily took a deep breath, straightening her uniform as she prepared for what she knew would be another uphill battle. At 28, Emily had already served 2 tours overseas and earned commendations that most soldiers could only dream of. But none of that seemed to matter when you were 5'4" and walked into rooms full of men who had already decided what you were worth before you opened your mouth. "You must be the new marksmanship instructor," called a voice from behind her. Emily turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man approaching. His uniform bore the insignia of a Navy SEAL, and his weathered face carried the kind of confidence that came from years of elite training. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reporting for duty, sir," Emily replied, offering a crisp salute. The man returned the salute with a slight smirk. "Commander Jake Morrison. I run the advanced training program here. I have to say, when they told me they were sending someone to upgrade our shooting instruction, I expected," he paused, looking her up and down, "someone different." Emily had heard variations of this conversation countless times. She kept her expression neutral. "I'm here to do a job, Commander. I believe my record speaks for itself." "Oh, I'm sure it does," Morrison said, his tone carrying a hint of condescension. "But shooting paper targets in basic training is a far cry from what we do here. We're preparing elite soldiers for real combat situations. Lives depend on precision under extreme pressure." "I understand that, sir." Morrison studied her for a moment, then gestured toward a group of soldiers gathered near the administration building. "Well, come on then. Let me introduce you to the team you'll be working with." As they walked across the compound, Emily noticed other soldiers stopping their conversations to stare. Some whispered to each other, and she caught fragments of their comments. "That's the new instructor. She looks like she should be teaching kindergarten. This is what they send us now." The group Morrison led her to consisted of 6 men, all seasoned soldiers with the kind of hard-earned muscle that came from years of intense training. Their conversation died as she approached. "Gentlemen, meet Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. She's here to teach you all how to shoot," Morrison announced, his words dripping with barely concealed amusement. Sergeant First Class Tony Brennan, a red-haired man with arms like tree trunks, let out a short laugh. "No offense, Sergeant, but I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. My daddy taught me on our farm in Tennessee." "What exactly are you going to show me that I don't already know?" "Yeah," chimed in Corporal Marcus Webb, a lanky soldier with a southern drawl. "We've all been through advanced marksmanship training. Some of us have confirmed kills in combat. What makes you think you can teach us anything new?" Emily felt the familiar burn of frustration in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not here to compete with your experience, gentlemen. I'm here to share techniques that might help you become even better." "Techniques?" repeated Staff Sergeant Kevin O'Brien, the oldest of the group. "Let me guess, you learned some fancy new methods in instructor school." "Kid, I've been in the army longer than you've been alive. I don't need some textbook warrior telling me how to hold a rifle." Morrison crossed his arms, clearly enjoying the show. Now, gentlemen, let's give the sergeant a chance. I'm sure she has some very interesting theories to share with us." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Emily realized this wasn't going to be just about proving herself to the soldiers she was meant to train. She was going to have to prove herself to their commander as well. "When do we start training?" she asked, refusing to let their attitudes shake her composure. "How about right now?" Morrison suggested, his eyes gleaming with what looked like malicious pleasure. "Why don't we head over to the range? You can show us what you've got." Emily nodded. "I'd be happy to." As they walked toward the shooting range, she overheard more whispered comments from the soldiers around them. "This ought to be good. I wonder how long before she realizes she's in over her head. Bet she flinches at the first gunshot." The shooting range at Fort Braxton was state-of-the-art, with multiple lanes stretching out to distances of up to 800 meters. The facility hummed with activity as other soldiers practiced their marksmanship skills. Emily noticed that several groups stopped what they were doing to watch as Morrison's team gathered around. Word was spreading quickly that the new female instructor was about to be put to the test. "So, Sergeant Rodriguez," Morrison said, picking up an M4 carbine from the weapon rack, "why don't you show us your form? Maybe walk us through your breathing technique or your stance or whatever it is you think we need to learn." Emily accepted the rifle, checking it with practiced efficiency. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, like an old friend she hadn't seen in a while. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting for her to fail, to prove that she didn't belong here. "Before I demonstrate anything," she said calmly, "I'd like to see what you're all capable of. It helps me understand what areas we might focus on." Morrison's grin widened. "Fair enough. Brennan, why don't you show the sergeant how it's done?" Brennan stepped forward, taking a rifle and moving to the firing line with swagger. He assumed a shooting position that looked textbook perfect, lined up his shot, and fired 10 rounds at a target 200 meters away. When they brought the target back, it showed a tight grouping near the bullseye. Impressive shooting by any standard. "Not bad," Emily said genuinely. "That's solid marksmanship." "Your turn," Sergeant Morrison said, gesturing toward the firing line. "Let's see what all that instructor training taught you." Emily moved to the line, feeling the weight of expectation and skepticism from everyone watching. She had faced this moment so many times before, the moment when she had to prove that she belonged, that she was more than just a woman trying to play soldier. But as she raised the rifle and settled into her stance, something felt different. Maybe it was the years of being underestimated, or maybe it was the accumulated frustration of always having to prove herself twice as hard as any man. Whatever it was, Emily felt a cold focus settle over her like a familiar blanket. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, and lined up her shot. The noise of the range faded away until there was nothing but her, the rifle, and the target. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out across the range, sharp and clean. Emily didn't flinch, didn't adjust her stance, just smoothly worked the bolt and lined up her second shot. She fired 9 more rounds in steady succession, each shot deliberate and controlled. When she lowered the rifle, the range had gone quiet. Even the other soldiers at distant lanes had stopped shooting to watch. "Bring it in," Morrison called to the range safety officer, as the target moved toward them on its mechanical pulley system. Emily could see the cluster of holes forming in the center. When it finally stopped in front of them, a collective murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. All 10 shots had found the bullseye. More than that, they formed a grouping so tight that several of the holes overlapped. At 200 meters, it was shooting that would have impressed even seasoned competition marksmen. Brennan stared at the target, his cocky expression replaced by something resembling respect. "That's real good shooting, Sergeant." But Morrison wasn't ready to concede anything. "Impressive," he said, though his tone suggested he was anything but impressed. "Of course, 200 meters isn't exactly long-range shooting. Any decent soldier should be able to hit a stationary target at that distance." Emily handed the rifle back to the rack. "What distance would you prefer, Commander?" Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Let's make it interesting. 500 meters. Moving target." A ripple of surprise went through the watching soldiers. 500 meters was serious. Distance shooting, and hitting a moving target at that range required exceptional skill, even among elite marksmen. "Jake," warned Sergeant O'Brien quietly, "that's asking a lot, even for she's supposed to be our instructor." Morrison cut him off. "If she can't handle advanced shooting scenarios, how is she going to teach my men to handle them?" Emily felt the familiar fire building in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Set it up." The range safety officer looked uncertain. "Commander, we don't usually run moving targets at 500 meters unless it's for advanced sniper training." "Are you sure? Set it up," Morrison repeated firmly, as they prepared the long-range lane. Emily noticed that word had spread throughout the base. More soldiers were gathering around the range, drawn by the news that the new female instructor was being put through what amounted to a public trial by fire. She recognized the looks on their faces, the same mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and barely concealed hope that she would fail that she had encountered at every assignment throughout her career. Some of these men had probably never served alongside women in combat roles. To them, she represented a change they weren't sure they wanted. The moving target system at 500 meters was designed to simulate combat conditions. A human silhouette would move across a 50-meter span at variable speeds, appearing and disappearing behind cover obstacles. Even experienced snipers found it challenging. "Standard combat scenario," Morrison announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The target will make 3 passes. You get 1 shot per pass. If this was real combat, those would be enemy soldiers threatening your team. Miss, and people die." Emily accepted the rifle, a more sophisticated weapon this time, equipped with a high-powered scope. She moved to the firing position and adjusted the scope for the longer distance as she settled into position. She heard whispered comments from the crowd that had gathered. "No way she makes this shot. Morrison's really putting her through the ringer. Poor girl doesn't know what she's gotten herself into." But there were other voices too, quieter ones. She looked pretty solid on that first round. That grouping was impressive. Maybe we should give her a chance. The range safety officer's voice crackled through the speakers. First target run in 3.2.1 target. The silhouette began moving across the range, a dark shape against the distant hillside. Emily tracked it through her scope, feeling for the rhythm of its movement, calculating lead time and wind adjustment. She fired. Through the scope, she saw the target jerk as her bullet found its mark. Center mass hit, called the spotter. A murmur went through the crowd, but Morrison's expression remained skeptical. Lucky shot. Let's see if she can do it again. The second run was faster, the target moving erratically to simulate a soldier trying to avoid sniper fire. Emily tracked it patiently, waiting for the right moment. She fired again, hit. This time the murmur was louder, and Emily could see some of the soldiers exchanging glances of surprise and grudging respect. Morrison's jaw tightened. Third run, maximum difficulty. The final target run was the most challenging. The silhouette moved at full speed, appeared for only brief moments between cover, and changed direction unpredictably. It was the kind of shot that separated exceptional marksmen from merely good ones. Emily felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her. She knew that missing this shot wouldn't just mean failing Morrison's test, it would confirm every prejudice and assumption these men had about women in combat roles. But as she tracked the target through her scope, something shifted in her mind. She stopped thinking about what everyone expected her to do and focused on what she knew she could do. Years of training, thousands of rounds fired, countless hours spent perfecting her craft. It all came together in this moment. The target appeared between two barriers, moving fast. Emily led it perfectly, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth motion she had practiced 10,000 times before. Through the scope, she watched the target stop abruptly as her bullet struck home, hit center mass. The range erupted in surprised voices. Soldiers who had been betting against her were now talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Even some of Morrison's team were looking at her with new respect, but Morrison himself seemed more irritated than impressed. Well, he said curtly, I suppose you can shoot, but marksmanship is just one small part of what we do here. Combat effectiveness requires a lot more than just being able to hit targets on a range. Emily handed the rifle back, her heart still racing from the adrenaline. I understand that, Commander. I'm here to teach shooting, not combat tactics, are you? Morrison's tone carried a challenge. Because if you're going to train my men, you need to understand the full scope of what they face. Shooting isn't just about accuracy, it's about making those shots when you're tired, stressed, under fire, and responsible for keeping your teammates alive. Emily felt like Morrison was moving the goalposts, but she refused to back down. I've been in combat, Commander. I know what it's like to shoot when lives are on the line. Do you? Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a level that only she could hear. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've spent your career safely behind the lines, teaching recruits and punching tickets. That's not the same as real combat. The accusation hit Emily like a physical blow. She had served 2 combat tours, had been in firefights, had saved lives with her marksmanship skills. But Morrison was questioning not just her abilities, but her courage and her service record. Before she could respond, Sergeant Brennan stepped forward. Commander, with respect, that was some exceptional shooting. Maybe we should give the sergeant a chance to show us what she can teach. Morrison turned his hard stare on Brennan. Are you questioning my judgment, Sergeant? Brennan backed down immediately. No, sir, of course not. But Emily had seen something in that moment, a crack in Morrison's absolute authority over his men. Some of them were starting to wonder if their commander's hostility toward her was justified. Training starts tomorrow at 0600, Morrison announced to the group. We'll see how well the sergeant's theories hold up under real training conditions. As the crowd began to disperse, Emily gathered her gear and prepared to leave the range. She had proven she could shoot, but she sensed this was only the beginning of whatever test Morrison had planned for her. Walking back toward the barracks, she overheard fragments of conversations from the soldiers around her. The tone had shifted slightly. There was still skepticism, but also curiosity and, from some, a grudging respect. But she also caught other comments that reminded her how much she still had to prove. Good shooting, but can she handle the pressure? When things get real, Morrison's going to make her life hell. I almost feel sorry for her. Emily didn't need their pity. What she needed was a chance to do the job she had been sent here to do. And despite Morrison's obvious hostility, She was determined to get that chance that she reached her quarters. She looked back at the range where a few soldiers were still talking about what they had witnessed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, Emily felt like she might have a fighting chance. She just hoped Morrison would give her a fair opportunity to prove what she could really do. The next morning arrived with the gray, misty quality typical of North Carolina autumns. Emily was already dressed and ready when her alarm went off at 0530. She had learned long ago that being early was one of the few advantages she could consistently maintain in a world that seemed determined to find reasons to dismiss her. The training area was bustling with activity when she arrived. Morrison's team was assembled, along with what appeared to be additional soldiers who had volunteered to observe the new instructor's first day. Word of yesterday's shooting demonstration had clearly spread throughout the base. "Good morning, Sergeant Rodriguez," Morrison called out as she approached. His tone was professionally neutral, but Emily could see the challenge in his eyes. "Ready for some real training?" "Yes, sir," Emily replied, setting down her equipment bag. Morrison gestured to an elaborate setup that hadn't been there the day before. Multiple shooting stations were arranged in a complex pattern, connected by obstacles, barriers, and what looked like climbing walls. It resembled something between a shooting range and a military obstacle course. "Today we're going to test your ability to teach combat marksmanship under realistic conditions," Morrison announced. "This isn't about standing still and shooting at paper targets. This is about making accurate shots while moving, under stress." With limited time and ammunition, Emily surveyed the course. It was clearly designed to be extremely challenging, the kind of training usually reserved for special operations units, not standard marksmanship instruction. "Commander," she said carefully, "this looks like advanced tactical training. My assignment was to improve basic and intermediate marksmanship skills." Morrison's smile was cold. "Did I misunderstand your credentials, Sergeant? I thought you were supposed to be some kind of expert. Surely someone of your alleged abilities can handle a little obstacle course." Emily felt the eyes of every soldier on the training ground watching her reaction. She knew Morrison was trying to set her up for failure by making the training unreasonably difficult. But backing down now would confirm every doubt these men had about her capabilities. "I can handle it," she said quietly. "Excellent." Morrison turned to address the gathered soldiers. "The sergeant will demonstrate each stage of the course, then instruct you on proper techniques. Let's see what she's got." The first station required the shooter to low crawl under barbed wire for 20 meters, then immediately transition to a shooting position and engage multiple targets at varying distances. Emily approached the starting line, acutely aware of the dozens of soldiers watching her every move. "Time starts now," Morrison called out. Emily dropped to her belly and began crawling through the mud under the wire obstacles. The ground was deliberately saturated with water, turning the earth into thick, clinging mud that soaked through her uniform and made every movement difficult. Behind her, she could hear comments from the watching soldiers. "Look at her struggling through the mud. This is what happens when you try to make soldiers out of." The comment was cut off by a sharp look from one of the senior NCOs. But Emily had heard enough. She reached the end of the crawl course covered in mud, her uniform soaked and heavy. Without pausing to clean herself off, she transitioned smoothly to a shooting position, brought her rifle up, and began engaging targets. The targets were positioned at distances from 100 to 400 meters, requiring rapid adjustment of her scope and shooting position. Emily moved through them systematically, her shots ringing out in steady rhythm. When the course timer buzzed, indicating her time was complete, she lowered her rifle and looked back at Morrison. "Targets," called to the range safety officer. All 8 targets showed clean hits in the vital zones. Emily had completed the most difficult part of the course without missing a single shot. A few soldiers clapped, but Morrison quickly silenced them. "Not bad for the first station. Let's see how you handle the second one." The second station was even more challenging. It required the shooter to climb a 15-foot rope wall, then immediately engage targets while rappelling down the other side. It was the kind of training that tested not just marksmanship skills, but physical strength, endurance, and the ability to shoot accurately while managing multiple complex tasks. Emily approached the rope wall, knowing that this was where Morrison expected her to fail. At 5'4" and 130 pounds, she didn't have the obvious physical advantages of the larger male soldiers, but she had trained extensively in rope climbing and rappelling, and she knew that technique could often overcome raw strength. She scaled the wall smoothly, using her legs to drive upward while her arms guided her ascent. At the top, she quickly set up her rappelling gear and began descending while simultaneously acquiring targets through her rifle scope. The shots had to be taken while she was moving down the rope, requiring her to time each shot perfectly between the natural rhythm of her descent. It was extraordinarily difficult shooting, the kind that even experienced special operations soldiers found challenging. Emily fired 6 shots during her descent, engaging targets at multiple distances and angles. When she reached the bottom, every target showed a hit. This time, the applause from the watching soldiers was louder and more sustained. Even some of Morrison's team were nodding with obvious respect. But Morrison wasn't finished. "Impressive," he said, though his tone suggested anything but admiration. "Let's see how you handle the final station." The third station was designed to be the most difficult of all. It simulated an urban combat scenario where the shooter had to move through a mock building, clearing rooms while engaging hostile targets and avoiding civilian targets that would randomly appear. "This one's different," Morrison explained, his voice carrying across the training area. "You'll be using simulation rounds, but the scenario is designed to test decision-making under extreme stress. You have to identify and engage hostile targets while protecting civilians. One mistake hitting a civilian target or missing a hostile and you fail the entire exercise." Emily nodded, understanding that this was Morrison's final attempt to prove she didn't belong here. The scenario was designed to test combat decision-making skills that went far beyond basic marksmanship instruction. As she prepared to enter the mock building, Sergeant Brennan approached her quietly. "Sergeant," he said in a low voice, "that scenario is tough. We've all run it multiple times, and even experienced soldiers sometimes fail it. Morrison usually gives people several practice runs before they attempt it for score." Emily looked at Brennan, surprised by his warning and encouragement. "Thanks for the heads up," she said quietly. "Timer starts now," Morrison called out. Emily entered the building, her rifle ready. The scenario was designed to be disorienting. Pop-up targets appeared suddenly, requiring split-second decisions about whether they represented hostile or civilian threats. She moved through the building methodically, clearing each room with practiced efficiency. When targets appeared, she had milliseconds to identify them and decide whether to shoot. The scenario was made more difficult by poor lighting, sudden loud noises designed to startle the shooter, and time pressure that forced rapid decision-making. Emily engaged 7 hostile targets during her run through the building, passing up 3 civilian targets that appeared in challenging positions designed to trick the shooter into making mistakes. When she emerged from the building, Morrison was waiting with a tablet showing her score. All hostile targets eliminated. No civilian casualties. "Time, 4 minutes 23 seconds, he read aloud, his voice flat. The watching soldiers erupted in applause and cheers. Emily had not only completed Morrison's impossible course, she had done it flawlessly. Sergeant O'Brien stepped forward, shaking his head in amazement. "That's the best run I've ever seen on that course. Hell, that's better than most of us could do after months of practice." But Morrison's expression had grown darker. Instead of acknowledging Emily's exceptional performance, he seemed angry that she had succeeded where he clearly expected her to fail. "Lucky run," he said dismissively. "Let's see if you can do it again." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Emily realized that no matter how well she performed, Morrison would continue moving the goalposts, demanding more and more until she finally failed and he could justify his prejudice against her. Before she could respond, Corporal Webb stepped forward. "Commander, with respect, that wasn't luck. That was outstanding shooting and tactical movement. Maybe we should listen to what the sergeant has to teach us." Several other soldiers murmured agreement. Emily could see that Morrison's authority over his men was beginning to crack. They had witnessed her abilities firsthand, and they were starting to question their commander's hostility toward their new instructor. Morrison's face flushed red. "Are you questioning my judgment, Corporal?" Webb backed down, but Emily could see that the damage was done. Morrison's men were beginning to wonder if their commander was being fair to their new instructor. "Training dismissed," Morrison snapped. "Report back here tomorrow at 0600 as the soldiers began to disperse. Several of them approached Emily for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton. She heard genuine respect in their voices. "That was incredible shooting," Sergeant Brennan said. "I've been through that course dozens of times, and I've never seen anyone nail it on their first try like that." "Thanks," Emily replied, trying to keep the satisfaction out of her voice. But As she gathered her gear, she caught sight of Morrison watching her from across the training area. His expression was dark with something that looked like hatred. Emily realized that by proving herself capable, she had made an enemy of the one person who had the power to make her assignment a success or a failure. And something told her that Morrison wasn't going to let this go quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily threw herself into the training program with determination that impressed even the most skeptical soldiers. Despite Morrison's continued hostility, she had begun to win over his men through sheer competence and professionalism. Her instruction methods were innovative and effective, where traditional marksmanship training focused on perfect conditions and static targets. Emily introduced techniques that helped soldiers maintain accuracy under stress. She taught breathing control methods that worked even during physical exertion, stance modifications that improved stability while moving, and trigger control techniques that maintained precision even when adrenaline was running high. The results were undeniable. Qualification scores across Morrison's unit improved dramatically. Soldiers who had struggled with long-range shooting were consistently hitting targets they had missed before. Even the most experienced marksmen found that Emily's techniques helped them shoot more accurately under challenging conditions. Sergeant Brennan had become an unexpected ally, openly praising Emily's instruction to anyone who would listen. "She's taught me more in 2 weeks than I learned in 3 years of advanced training," he told the other soldiers. "That breathing technique she showed us works even when you're exhausted and stressed out," Corporal Webb agreed. "And those movement drills, I never realized how much my accuracy suffered when I was transitioning between positions." Her methods fixed that problem, but Morrison's attitude toward Emily had only grown worse. He seemed to take his men's improvement as a personal affront, as if their success under Emily's instruction somehow diminished his own leadership. He began finding increasingly petty reasons to criticize her work. Her paperwork was filed incorrectly. Her equipment wasn't stored to his exact specifications. Her training schedule needed to be revised for reasons that seemed to change daily. Sergeant Rodriguez Morrison called out as Emily was cleaning weapons after a particularly successful training session. "I need to see you in my office now." Emily followed Morrison to the small administrative building where he maintained his office. The walls were covered with commendations, photos from his SEAL team days, and military memorabilia that spoke to a distinguished career. Morrison closed the door and turned to face her, his expression darker than she had ever seen it. "I'm going to be direct with you, Sergeant," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't think you belong here. I don't think women belong in combat roles, and I sure as hell don't think they belong training elite soldiers." Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her voice steady. "Commander, my performance speaks for itself. Your men's improvement in marksmanship is documented and measurable." "My men," Morrison emphasized, stepping closer, "are getting soft. They're starting to think that fancy shooting techniques can replace warrior mentality and combat experience. You're turning them into target shooters instead of soldiers." "That's not true, and you know it," Emily replied, fighting to keep her temper under control. "Their combat readiness has improved across every metric." Morrison slammed his hand down on his desk, causing Emily to jump. "Don't you dare tell me what I know about my own men. I've been leading soldiers since before you were old enough to wear a uniform. I know what makes a warrior, and it isn't some female playing dress-up as a soldier." The mask had finally come off. Emily realized that Morrison's hostility had never been about her qualifications or her teaching methods. It was about the simple fact that she was a woman in a role he believed should belong only to men. "Commander," she said quietly, "I think you're allowing personal bias to cloud your professional judgment." Morrison's face turned red with rage. "Personal bias? You want to talk about bias? Let me tell you what I see. I see a system that's gone soft, that cares more about political correctness than combat effectiveness. I see standards being lowered so that people like you can feel included in places where you don't belong. My standards are higher than anyone else's on this base." Emily shot back, her own anger finally beginning to surface. "I've outperformed your men on every test you've given me. I've improved their shooting beyond anything they achieved under your instruction. What more do you want from me?" "I want you gone," Morrison said flatly. "I want you transferred back to whatever safe little training base you came from, and I want a real instructor sent to replace you." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. I'm filing a formal complaint about your performance and requesting your immediate transfer. I have enough connections in this man's army to make sure it happens." Emily felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Everything she had worked for, all the progress she had made with the soldiers, could be wiped away by Morrison's vindictive report. On what grounds? she asked. Morrison smiled coldly. Failure to maintain unit cohesion, inability to relate to the combat mindset required for elite soldiers, general unsuitability for the position. He paused, enjoying her obvious distress. I'm sure I can think of a few more reasons if needed. Emily realized that Morrison was going to destroy her career out of pure spite and prejudice. No matter how well she performed, no matter how much she improved his soldiers' capabilities, he would never accept her presence. This isn't about my performance, she said quietly. This is about your own insecurities. Morrison's expression turned dangerous. Excuse me, you're threatened by the fact that a woman can do this job as well as you can, maybe better. Your men respect me, and that bothers you because it challenges your belief that only men can be warriors. Morrison stepped toward her, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Emily thought he might actually strike her. Get out of my office, he said in a voice barely above a whisper, and stay away from my men. Your transfer will be processed within the week. Emily left Morrison's office feeling like she had been punched in the stomach. All her career achievements, all her combat experience, all her proven abilities meant nothing in the face of one man's prejudice and his willingness to abuse his authority to enforce it. But as she walked across the compound, something began to burn inside her chest. It wasn't just anger, it was a determination that had been forged through years of fighting for recognition and respect in a system that seemed designed to exclude her. Morrison thought he could destroy her career with a few phone calls and a negative report. He thought his connections and his rank gave him the power to erase everything she had accomplished. But Emily Rodriguez had faced down enemy fire, had proven herself in combat, and had earned every rank and commendation through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. She wasn't going to let Morrison or anyone else take that away from her without a fight. She just needed to figure out how to fight back against someone who held all the cards and wasn't afraid to use them. She reached her quarters. Emily made a decision. If Morrison wanted a war, she would give him one, but she would fight it on her terms, using the one weapon he couldn't take away from her, the truth about what she was capable of. The question was, how could she prove that truth in a way that even Morrison's connections and authority couldn't suppress? 3 days before Emily's scheduled transfer was set to take effect, an opportunity arose that would change everything. Fort Braxton was selected to host the annual inter-service marksmanship competition, a prestigious event where elite soldiers from all branches of the military competed in advanced shooting challenges. The competition drew the best marksmen from Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Marine Scout snipers, and Air Force Special Operations. It was considered the ultimate test of military marksmanship skills, and winning brought considerable honor to both the individual competitor and their unit. Emily learned about the competition from Sergeant Brennan, who found her packing her personal effects in her quarters. Sergeant, you can't leave now, he said urgently. The competition is in 2 days, and we need you. Emily looked up from her duffel bag. Morrison made it clear that I'm not welcome here. Brennan, my transfer orders are final. But this is your chance to prove what you can really do. Brennan insisted. The competition is open to any qualified marksman on the base. Morrison can't stop you from entering, it's regulated by higher command. Emily shook her head. Even if I wanted to compete, Morrison would find a way to sabotage it. He's made up his mind about me. Brennan sat down on the chair across from her. Sergeant, you don't understand what you've meant to this unit. Your training has made us better soldiers. We all know it, even if Morrison refuses to admit it. Emily paused in her packing. What are you saying? I'm saying that half the unit is talking about requesting transfers if you leave. Morrison might have the authority to force you out, but he can't force good soldiers to stay under a commander who lets prejudice override good judgment. Emily stared at Brennan, surprised by his words. You'd really do that? We'd do more than that, said another voice from the doorway. Corporal Webb entered, followed by 3 other soldiers from the unit. We've been talking, and we think you should enter the competition, not just enter it, added Sergeant O'Brien. Win it. Show everyone on this base exactly what kind of soldier you are. Emily felt a spark of hope, but she forced herself to be realistic. Even if I entered, Morrison would never allow me to compete as part of his unit's team. You don't have to, Webb said with a grin. Individual competitors can enter independently. You'd be representing yourself.